The first video, we talked about looking at the patterns when I multiply by a power of 10, and the pattern that we came up with when we multiplied by a power of 10 is that the decimal always moves one to the right, one place value. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at what happens to our pattern when we multiply a value by a number that is less than 1, or when we multiply by a place value decimal. So a place value decimal that I would be talking about is going to be 0 and 1/10, or 0 and 1/100. Those are going to be the decimals that we look at specifically for today. So I'm going to go back to that first example that we looked at, which was 3 and 63 hundredths. And when I multiply 3 and 63 hundredths by 1, my answer stays the same, right? The decimal doesn't move. So anytime I multiply anything by 1, the answer is that original number I multiplied by 1. But let's look at what it does when I multiply it by a value that is less than 1, or by that decimal place value. So when I multiply by that decimal place value, I get a new value of 0 and 363 thousandths. When I multiply 3 and 63 hundredths by 1/100th, I get a value of 363 ten thousandths. So again, when we were multiplying by a number that was greater than 1, or a power of 10, so we're looking at place values that are greater than 1, our decimal moved one place value to the right. The pattern that we have for decimals, let's take a look at it. So my decimal was between the 3 and the 6. My place value, when I multiplied by a value that was less than 1, moved one digit to the left. And then here, when I multiplied by 1/100th, the decimal moved 2 places to the left. So the pattern that I can notice, or the pattern that I can assume when I'm multiplying by a decimal place value, is that, so I'm going to do my little shorthand, decimal place value, the decimal goes to the left one place value. So the pattern becomes opposite of what we were doing when we were looking at powers of 10. So we're going to do a couple of practices where we multiply by tenths and hundredths, just to get a feel for what that looks like when I multiply by a power, or by a decimal place value. Okay, so the first example that I'm going to have is, I'm going to go back into your guys' guided practice, which is going to be on page 167, and I'm going to do problem number 5. And so if I take a look at problem number 5, I have 1 and 24 hundredths, and I'm multiplying that by 1/100th. And we said the pattern that we had was that when we multiply, so we're multiplying by a decimal place value, our decimal moves one place to the left. So it moves to the left one place value. So here, I'm multiplying 2 numbers behind the decimal. So my decimal needs to move 2 values to the left. But what I notice over here is that I only have 1 number, and I need to move it 2 places. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add my 0 now, just so that I know that I have enough values to move. So I'm going to move my decimal 1, 2. So my decimal is now going to go there. So my new value for this is going to be decimal 0, 1, 2, 4. So it's going to be 124 ten thousandths is what my new value is going to be when I multiply that by 1/100th. Okay, So let's take a look at another problem. So if I have 17 and 6/10 and I'm multiplying that by 1/10, my place value is going to move one place to the left because I'm multiplying by a decimal. So here, I'm going to go ahead and just move my decimal there. So my new answer is going to be 1 and 76 hundredths. Okay. If I have 7 and 25 hundredths and I multiply that by 1/100th, again, I have two numbers behind the decimal, so that means my decimal needs to move two places to the left. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move it one. Oh, I ran out of numbers, so I'm going to add another 0, move it the second place, and now my new value is going to be 725 10,000ths. Okay, so the important thing to remember is that so looking at my pattern, so looking at how to multiply decimals by my powers of 10, that when I have a power of 10, so I'll do 10 to the third as my power of 10, the decimal is going to move to the right however many places my exponent is, or the number of zeros that I have. When I'm multiplying by a decimal, my decimal is going to move to the left by however many numbers are going to be behind that decimal. So here it's going to move two values behind. So because I have two values behind the decimal. So if we take a look at number 1 in your guided practice, I intentionally left this problem for last. It says, how can you use mental math to find 48 and 45 and 8/10 times 10 to the third hour and 45 and 8/10 times 1/100th? Okay, so going back to what we just talked about, 45 and 8/10 times 10 to the third power and 45 and 8/10 times 1/100th. Okay, so what I'm going to do this mentally is on this problem here, I'm going to move the decimal three places to the right because it's a power of 10. And whenever I have a power of 10, the decimal moves to the right. The number of zeros that I have, if I have 100, I would move it two places. Here, if I had 1,000, so if I had actually written out the 1,000 value, I would move it still three places. And then with my decimal, I'm going to move the decimal two places to the left because I have a value that is less than 1. And so because this value is less than 1, my answer over here needs to be smaller than this original product. So the answer here would be, if I move it two places, it's going to be 0.458. So it's going to be 458 thousandths. Here, my answer would be, so if I look at times 10 to the third, it's going to be 445. So 458, that's one place value move. Add two zeros, so it's going to be 45,800. So I use those patterns to determine how I'm going to move the decimal. Notice I didn't actually do any algorithm work with here. Everything I did was using that structure that I already know about place value and those patterns. So you're going to complete both sides of 4-1. You're going to finish the independent practice, and then you're going to do the math practices and problems.